Okay, let's talk about one of the most famous stories ever, the serpent in the Garden of Eden. We all know it, right? But what if I told you that the story we think we know is all built on a huge mistranslation?
So, if I ask you, who's the Bible's first villain? The original bad guy in the Garden of Eden. I bet one character pops into your head right away.
Yep, the serpent, that sly, tempting snake. I mean, that image is everywhere, right? It's shaped our art, our books, our entire idea of good versus evil for thousands of years.
But here's the twist. What if that whole picture is wrong? What if it's based more on, centuries of tradition than what the original text actually says? What if the Hebrew in Genesis tells a completely different story about this creature?
And that's where we get to this really radical new thesis. It's a bold claim, for sure. It basically says our traditional view is just off. And it all comes down to the actual words used in the original text.
Okay, get ready for this. The core idea here isn't just that the serpent is misunderstood. It's that the serpent is actually the first symbol of Christ in the entire Bible. Yeah, you heard me right. A sacrificial figure set up for a redemptive role. Now, I know that sounds absolutely wild, but the argument is built step by step, starting with the language.
So to really get this, we've got to do a little detective work. We have to look past our English Bibles and dig into a couple of key Hebrew words that totally change how you see that famous curse.
It all kicks off with the very first thing the Bible says about the serpent. The text says it's more arum than any other animal. Now, our Bibles usually translate that as crafty or cunning, which sounds pretty bad, right? But the word itself just means shrewd or perceptive. It's not a negative word. And this is huge. The text never calls the serpent evil or wicked or a demon. Not once.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, how we read the curse. Traditionally, we see it as a demotion, right? Cursed beneath everything. But the Hebrew phrase used there, mikal, can also mean more than or above. So God says the serpent is cursed above all livestock. And think about it, what is livestock in the Torah? It's the animals used for sacrifice, bulls, goats, you name it. So this reading argues the serpent isn't being demoted at all. It's being elevated into a special, one-of-a-kind, symbolic role even above the normal sacrifices.
And what about that whole eating dust thing? Well, it's not literal. It's not about its diet. The clue is just a few verses later when God tells humanity, "To dust you shall return." So in this story, dust is human death. It's mortality. So when the serpent is told to eat dust, it's being given a symbolic job to carry the consequence of human death. And wow, does that sound familiar, right? It's a lot like Christ on the cross. It's framed as an assignment, not a punishment.
Now, an idea this big can't just stand on its own. If it's true, you'd expect to see this pattern pop up again later in the Bible, right? Well, according to this argument, that's exactly what happens.
You can literally trace this serpent theme through the Bible. First, in Genesis, you have the serpent being set apart for this special role. Fast forward a few centuries to the book of Numbers. The Israelites are dying from snake bites, and what's God's solution? He tells Moses to make a bronze serpent and lift it up on a pole so people can look at it and be healed. Then, the whole thing comes full circle in the Gospel of John, when Jesus himself points back to that exact moment to explain his own crucifixion.
And honestly, this is the mic drop moment for the whole argument. I mean, think about it. Jesus would never, ever compare himself to a symbol of pure evil. The reason he brings up the serpent is because he's fulfilling that same redemptive pattern. A pattern that, if this thesis is right, started way back in the garden.
Okay, I can hear you thinking. This is the big one, right? The elephant in the room. If the serpent isn't the villain, what about Satan? Where does he come in?
And yeah, this is the main counter-argument you'll hear. In the book of Revelation, written way, way later, there's a verse that calls the ancient serpent the devil and Satan. Seems pretty clear-cut. So, how does this new interpretation deal with that?
Well, it really comes down to how you read the Bible. The traditional view says, see, Revelation is explaining what Genesis meant all along. But this new thesis says, hold on a second. You can't take a super symbolic apocalyptic book from the end of the Bible and use it to reinterpret a foundational story from the beginning. The author of Revelation was pulling on all kinds of serpent myths, not just the one from Genesis. The argument here is you should use Genesis to understand Revelation, not the other way around.
So, if the serpent isn't the adversary, who or what is? The text points to a condition,
not a creature. The Hebrew word is iva, which means enmity. It's this state of conflict and opposition that suddenly enters the picture. So in this reading, Satan, the adversary, isn't a snake. It's the tension, the hostility itself.
All right, that was a lot. So let's take a step back and just pull this all together. What does this reinterpretation really mean for this incredibly foundational story?
So, to sum it up, the argument is that the book of Genesis never calls the serpent evil. The so-called curse is really an appointment to a unique, redemptive role, which makes the serpent the very first symbol or type of Christ. The real Satan here isn't a creature, but the condition of enmity or hostility. And if you read it this way, you get this amazing, consistent, redemptive story that flows from Genesis through Numbers and right into the Gospels.
Ultimately, this whole thing is a challenge to read the text for what it says, not what centuries of tradition have told us it says. And I love how the source material puts it. This is not tradition, this is text, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
And that really is the biggest takeaway here. Look, whether you buy this whole argument or not, it makes you think, doesn't it? It forces you to ask a really important question. If a story we thought we knew backward and forward can be flipped on its head like this, what else might we be missing? What other things have we just accepted because of tradition without looking closely at the text itself?